Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be the discussion of three, I believe, clandestine selected soldiers that entered into popular culture during the 1960s into the 1970s. And I'm going to list them in chronological order of their birth. Okay, and I've done videos on only one of these three Japanese people. But to set the table before we sit down and enjoy our first course, let me just say that this CRT business, critical race theory, this is something that's hundreds of years old. Perhaps it's 1,000 or more years old. It's the idea of dividing our society into districts, right? You got the ghetto, got the Jewish ghetto, got the Irish ghetto, got the Sicilian ghetto. You got where the black colored people live, ghetto, right? This is a standard operation, anthropology 101, ways to control the sheep, the vassal class, the working class people by the nobility class at the top, who owns everything, who controls all the land, controls who gets to go onto the land to work, presumably, who owns all the big corporate businesses and owns pretty much all the valuable artwork on the planet is controlled by the nobility class, right? That's class number one. But it's a really small group of people. You know, it's fewer than, it's really fewer than 10,000 people, but let's say it's 1 million people for the whole planet, or somewhere up in that nobility class when you add in inbreeded marriages, and the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. Maybe you can balloon it up to 1 million people, but there's only a few thousand people are actually controlling things at the top, and that's the top of the pyramid, or the circle of trust within the top of the pyramid. The second class is the vassal class, which, we see them out and about in their fancy cars, and they live in the nice homes with the enclaves with no sidewalks and the 40-foot hedgerows. Those are people that do a job at a mutual fund company or investment company or at a bank, or are executives at one of the Fortune 500 companies, or are managing directors at one of the private equity / hedge fund money laundering facilities, or Hollywood elite managers within the social engineering that is Hollywood music, Hollywood television, Hollywood Netflix, Hollywood digital programming, Hollywood digital content, Hollywood films, books, which New York publishing houses, London publishing houses for reading materials of periodicals, magazines, exposés. You've heard the names: Vogue, you've heard Vanity Fair, you've heard People, you've heard Daily Mail, you've heard TMZ, Harvey Levin. You've heard the names: Life, Time Life. We've heard of the Patricia Hearst family empire, William Randolph Hearst, yellow journalism. And that's where I'm going to begin today's story about these three Japanese clandestine soldiers. Was that, before the turn of the 1900s, we had William Randolph Hearst, who had inherited his newspaper empire, and he promoted the concept of yellow journalism. You either can destroy someone in the press by making up lies about them, or gossip, or scandalous activities, which may or may not be true, but it doesn't matter what's true. We've learned that watching my videos and watching Hollywood and watching the fake news media, is that it makes no difference if you believe, these stories are true. It doesn't matter. It only matters that you go along with the story, right? You don't have to believe in anything, because the invisible hand is running the show, right? And all they're interested in is pacifying and controlling and entertaining you. That's the concept of Roman circuses, and selling sangria wine to the peasants to keep them drunk until they have to go to work the next day, and then they forget all about this idea that they're being manipulated by the nobility class, which they are, with the help of the vassal class. Those are the three classes. Nobility at the top, vassal class meaning management supervision of the pacification and control programs and management of the slaves. And then you have basically the serfs, which is a form of land-based slavery. It's slavery by another name. We call it consumerism. They renamed it consumerism. However, when they roll out the central bank digital currency, any day now they can roll that out. They're going to take the vassal class and they're going to take the serfs and just turn them into obedience slavery, digital enslavement programs. So the vassal class, who thinks they're doing pretty good, they're going to be turned very quickly into a digital obedience participation score. So the higher your score, the more privileges you will have. You'll have no freedoms at all. You'll have no freedoms. The only freedoms that you can earn as a human being on this planet are the freedoms that you're willing to fight for. So if you're unwilling to get a bloody nose, if you're afraid to get a bruise on your knuckles, you'll be a slave with no freedom. You may get some bread. So you may earn privilege to eat some food. Own nothing and be happy. That's your fate, unless you're willing to fight for your liberty. Most people are not. And so most people are going to be digital enslaved zombies. And it's best for them to be kept, in a delusionary state. They'll be happier that way. And that is the plan. No cognitive reasoning skills required to be a digital enslaved zombie. All right, so be that as it may, we had the first character, which I've done a video on, which I encourage you to go look up, Dr. Victor Oda. Victor Oda. He started out born in Livingston, Montana, in Park County. Livingston, it's an old railroad town. You can look it up. There's only about 9,000 people that live in Livingston, Montana. But it became popular when we were building the railroad out with all those Chinese slaves that we brought in here to do our dirty work, right? Build a railroad connecting east to west. Dr. Victor Oda started out just as an ordinary boy, born on May 5th, 1924, to his parents who immigrated here from Tokyo, Japan. So I don't know who they knew, because they're not Chinese, they're Japanese. So perhaps they had a management position in Livingston. I don't know how they got to Livingston, but you should know they arrived in Livingston in the late 1800s. And so they've been there for a while. This is all during Patricia Hearst's grandfather, William Randolph Hearst, promoting stories in the newspapers, in all the big cities like New York and Chicago and San Francisco, Los Angeles, warning people of the yellow peril. So before COVID and the coronavirus, we had what William Randolph Hearst referred to as the yellow peril. Once they got those railroad tracks built and they didn't have any work for these Asian people, they became the coronavirus, CRT, right? Critical race theory, because they were yellow people. And it was hard to distinguish between Japanese yellow people, who are really Oriental, and Asian, who are Chinese. And so we just blanket label yellow peril having to do with anyone that have squinty eyes, right? And that would include Japanese people. So there's a lot of prejudice throughout the world ginned up through William Randolph Hearst and all the newspapers of the day. And when radio presented itself, this social engineering anthropology control messaging of yellow peril was promoted on radio to extend the racial critical race theory out. This is COVID, people. This is all the stuff that's happening in our society today. It's been done for the last 1,000 years, okay? It's just new because it's the first time maybe you're aware of it, but this is the world that we live in. So this is all before World War I, and then this is before Pearl Harbor, right? So, I mean, that's all you need is an international fake incident and blame it on your CRT boogeyman, like those Japanese, where you remember they changed the name from Japanese to Jap. And we changed the name of Vietnamese, French, Polynesian people, and we changed that to Gooks and to Kong. If they were part of the Chinese Communist Party, they were Kong, Viet Cong, those crazy communist Kong. You see how easy? You just flip a switch. You just flip a switch to boogeyman demonize an innocent person. You just flip a switch. It takes about a nanosecond. So Victor Oda was born up in Livingston, Montana, and he was about, so we get out, let's fast forward to Pearl Harbor, right? So Pearl Harbor comes along December 7th, 1941, right? So that makes Victor Oda approximately 17 years old. So Victor Oda is in high school. And then we have the Japanese surprise sneak attack, as if it's possible to send 6 aircraft carriers and a support fleet 3,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean without the OSS Navy intelligence noticing? Really? I mean, Japan had the second most aircraft carriers of anyone in the planet besides the United States. I think the United States had 11, and China and Japan had 6, and Russia, the evil Russians, had 0, and the Germans, the Nazis, had 0 aircraft carriers. But Japan had 8, and they sent 6 of 8 to Honolulu. And nobody noticed. Okay, I'm calling poppycock on that. It's impossible to go 3,000 miles with 80% of your naval fleet and not be noticed. And by the way, it's totally impossible to attack San Francisco or Long Beach, Port of Long Beach, Port of San Francisco, Golden Gate Bridge, Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Malibu. Not possible. That's 7,000 miles of travel. Not possible. Okay, they don't have enough support capability, and they had an oil embargo problem. All right, well, anyway, long story boring. Victor Oda magically gets through World War II. I don't know if his family was interred. We interred well over 120,000 Californians during World War II. Perfectly innocent people sent out to the deserts of Nevada or to Angel Island off Tiburon, which is a Spooksville place if you don't know, Marin County. And right off Marin County, we have Angel Island, right across from where Robin Williams was murder-suicided. Kind of looks like it could be either one. Could be a murder, could be a suicide. You pick. And, really very close to that proximity, we had an internment camp on Angel Island, which is next to Alcatraz. I'm sure you've heard of Alcatraz Island. It's next to Angel Island. Those are the two major islands in the San Francisco Bay. And one was used for a prison camp for Japanese people, the Japs. And somehow, some way, World War II ends, and Victor Oda now, he's 21 years old, and he somehow, magically, I think, because he was selected for service, gets sent off to University of Michigan, all right, where he attends 4-year university and goes to medical school at University of Michigan, and graduates with eye surgery capability, so he can perform cataract surgeries, not to mention he can prescribe glasses. He can do eye exams and examine your eyes and prescribe glasses, sell at glass frames, grind the lenses to an outsourced contractor. And this all happens magically going into the 1950s. As soon as he wraps up his medical school, which is going to happen in the early 1950s, Dr. Ohta, he's now a medical doctor, but he has no experience, he enrolls in the United States Air Force. And he joins the Air Force where he practices medicine. And I don't have any data on where Dr. Victor Oda, ophthalmologist, I don't know where they sent him in the United States Air Force. But remember, we had just recovered from the Japanese by allegedly dropping hydrogen bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which I'm here to tell you is I don't think they did drop a hydrogen bomb. I think they did the normal firebombing that they always do, and they just called it a nuclear hydrogen bomb. But they actually didn't do that. But in any case, the photographs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki look exactly the same as all the other dozens of cities that were firebombed and no hydrogen bombs. So I can't tell the difference between firebombing and hydrogen bombing detonated far above the city than the burning on the ground. It looks pretty much the same. Sort of like Jack Cassidy's apartment after he allegedly left a cigarette lit, dropped it on his Naugahyde saddle leather couch, and then burned his apartment like a controlled felony arson. Going to call poppycock on the hydrogen bomb, calling poppycock on the Jack Cassidy, drunken stupor, left his cigarette lit arson fire. All right, so where do I go next? Victor Oda is discharged from the United States Air Force in like 1959. He has the rank of major, and he is miraculously transported to Monterey Peninsula, Spooksville, USA, California, where he has set up shop with a ophthalmology office in Santa Cruz, in close proximity to University of California, Santa Cruz, and or where eventually University of California, Santa Cruz will be established in the coming years. And he buys a red Rolls Royce. His wife, Virginia, is a Caucasian woman. They have 5 children, one of whom, a son, the second child is a son. He dies early, so he ends up with 2 daughters and 2 younger sons. So 2 older daughters, Tara and Tara, and then 2 boys, Taggart and forgot the name of the youngest son. But anyway, they have 4 children, and they're living not just anywhere. They're living at 999 North Rodeo Gulch Road, which in a custom Frank Lloyd Wright home overlooking the Monterey Bay and the Pacific Ocean. Right? This is extraordinary. He's up on the hill in the Santa Cruz Mountains. They had to cut some trees down to build this magnificent home. Frank Lloyd Wright. They have a swimming pool, which, by the way, it's very unusual to have a swimming pool in Santa Cruz or in Monterey, because the weather's not particularly conducive to swimming outdoors most of the year. It's too cold, and it's foggy in the morning generally. You can't really think about getting a suntan until after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, really. So you have a narrow window to really think about the California lifestyle. So normally you wouldn't spend that kind of money on a swimming pool if you're not going to use it. But anyway, Dr. Victor Oda, I don't know who made these decisions, but he's living in a Frank Lloyd Wright home with an ocean view and a Monterey Bay view, also a view of Fort Ord, Army military, and Navy intelligence, which is the postgraduate naval school, you can see out from his home and look down that away. It's about 15 miles away from his home in Soquel, which is a suburb of Santa Cruz. He's got the Dominican Hospital at the bottom of his road. So he's about a mile from his acute care hospital, where he has privileges to perform cataract surgery. So he's a nice, cozy situation. He's a mile from the hospital, where he's on the board of directors, and he's in charge of fundraising activities for them. His 2 daughters are attending Dominican Catalina School, which is a spook school in Monterey, across from the fairgrounds in Monterey, where the International Pop Festival was held. And Dr. Victor Oda's wife, Virginia, is a philanthropist, age 43. Dr. Victor Oda gets out to age 46. His daughter, Tara, has graduated from high school and from the Catalina School, and she is now Santa Catalina School, and she's off to Manhattan, New York, to study fashion design, leaving Tara, who's in Lark. Lark is in the same class as Patricia Hearst, who's also attending the Santa Catalina School, where Dakota Johnson eventually goes, where Abigail Folger has already been graduated from the Santa Catalina School before she went off to Radcliffe Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I'm telling you, it's a nobility class school that Dr. Oda's children are enrolled in, and he's driving a red Rolls Royce, and his wife, Virginia, is driving a Lincoln Continental, the most upscale car that Ford makes, and they're living the dream. And I'm telling you, the numbers don't add up on that. You can't be in the Air Force and discharged in late 1959, and that in the next 10 years, have a custom Frank Lloyd Wright house in the Santa Cruz Mountains with a view of the Monterey Bay and a swimming pool, and drive a red Rolls Royce, and have your wife drive in a Lincoln Continental, and have 4 children, 2 of which are enrolled in a very expensive, $60,000 a year tuition school, not counting the boarding component. That's what it costs to go to that school if you don't board. So if you board, you have room and board tacked onto the $55,000. So that's probably $100,000 a year per child per year at the Santa Catalina school. So you see what I'm saying is this guy's not making that much money with Medicare cataract surgeries, right? I mean, ophthalmology was very lucrative profession, no doubt. But I don't think you could score the Frank Lloyd Wright house, the Rolls Royce, the expensive tuition for 2 of 4 of your children, and make it all happen that way. So he's on a special program, or his wife, Virginia, Tobias, maybe she's an Illuminati. That's a possibility. But if she's Illuminati, that means the invisible hand is surveilling her. All right, so Dr. Victor Oda, very important person. We're going to circle back to him in a minute. He's living the dream in Santa Cruz. The other person on my list is Dr. Thomas Noguchi. And I'm sure you're familiar with Thomas Noguchi in my other stories. Thomas Noguchi was born on January 4th, 1927. So he's 2.5 years younger than Dr. Victor Oda. And Thomas Noguchi also had to get through World War II in bomb shelters. He lived in Tokyo, and he went to prestigious schools in Tokyo, and he went to a prestigious medical school, the Nippon School. He graduated medical school in Tokyo in 1951, and then somebody said to him, like Jed Clampett at the Beverly Hillbillies television show produced by the Masonic Eye, "Hey, Thomas Noguchi, California is the place you ought to be." So he loaded up the truck and he moved to Pasadena, I mean. He moved to Pasadena. Thomas Noguchi. And then he wound his way up to becoming the medical examiner in the Los Angeles County. And one of his first cases was Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe, a murder-suicide. Acute barbiturate overdose is what he called it. Acute barbiturate poisoning. Thomas Noguchi, age 35, does Marilyn Monroe's autopsy in 1962 and rules her death in acute barbiturate poisoning. Now, he didn't say how she died, so the district attorney helped out and said, "Oh, it was a suicide." So Dr. Thomas Noguchi said, "Well, I didn't find any evidence that contradicts that." That's a confirmation of suicide for Marilyn Monroe, who died over on Brentwood area, where Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered over that way, remember, by maybe O.J. Simpson. She lived 1,000 meters from where Marilyn Monroe was done away with, off of San Vicente Boulevard, in walking distance to where O.J. Simpson was living in Brentwood. Now, O.J. wasn't living there in 1962 when Marilyn Monroe went away. But I'm just letting you know, it's the same neighborhood. It's just like West Hollywood, where we have all these murder-suicides going on and about the Magic Castle and the Dolby Theater and the Church of Scientology Visitor Center, and over there where the Shoreham Towers are, where Art Linkletter's kids keep getting murdered. Jack Cassidy got murdered 1,000 meters from where Diane Linkletter got murdered. Jack Cassidy, married to Shirley Jones. Yeah, he gets whacked in the same neighborhood that Art Linkletter's kids get whacked in. And Dominic Dunn, let's not leave him out. His daughter got whacked in that neighborhood also, as did Rebecca Schaefer. Yes, she did. As did Lindsay Perlman, who we don't talk about. Yeah, she got whacked there too, age 43. The others were younger. So, let me tell you something about Thomas Noguchi. He has done all the who's who of the big autopsies. He started out with Marilyn Monroe, but then he did Janis Joplin. He did Sharon Tate. And what's peculiar about the Sharon Tate is that there were 7 victims that weekend of the Tate LaBianca killings. But Thomas Noguchi only did Sharon Tate, and he didn't do Abigail Folger, and he didn't do Lino LaBianca. He had 2 other medical physicians do the other 6. So it's kind of like Dr. Thomas Noguchi gets to choose which bodies he's going to examine because there's quite a few doctors in that office. It's possible once Thomas Noguchi became the director, he didn't need to do any examinations himself. But he's sort of playing the Quincy character, right? But Quincy had a boss, and eventually Thomas Noguchi became the boss of Quincy, right? So we call that, I have my dear friend MK Ultra Now channel. He calls that blurring the lines. I mean, that's very astute and correct. The lines are blurred with Thomas Noguchi. The lines are blurred with the autopsies that are performed at the Los Angeles County exam. I think we could discuss that. Applies to the William Shatner mysterious murder-suicide Valium alcohol drowning of his third wife, who he's in the process of aggressively divorcing, Noreen Kidd Shatner, age 40. Really good swimmer, drowns in the swimming pool. All right, so that's in Studio City. So that's close by, but it's not in the zip code that I'm referring to with West Hollywood and in Benedict Canyon. All right, so Thomas Noguchi also did John Belushi's autopsy. He did Robert Kennedy assassination. He actually pushed back on the narrative on that, which implicated Thane Eugene Caesar. But he got fired as a result of his resistance to go with the Suran Suran did it. And when he returned after about being gone for almost a year, he was immediately given the Sharon Tate murders, which he also used the word bayonet. He couldn't type it, but he did speak it at least 3 times. The Los Angeles Municipal Police Department used the word bayonets in their first and second preliminary murder investigation reports. So the word bayonet was used at least 5 times that I can tell, twice in writing and, with the police department. And since very few police officers were called at the murder trial for Charlie Manson, it didn't matter because they didn't interview the policemen that were associated with the reports that used the word bayonet. And they had instructed the doctors from the medical exam, 3 doctors from the medical exam, not to use the word bayonet. But Noguchi did. He did it at the preliminary hearing, and he did it again at the murder trial 6 months later. So Thomas Noguchi was a guy who didn't follow orders 100%. So I give him props for that. But he did follow orders quite a bit. He did the autopsy on William Holden, which I don't agree with. He did the autopsy on Natalie Wood, which I don't agree with. He did the autopsy on Thomas Albert Decker, which I don't agree with. That was a murder, which they called bizarre suicide. He did the autopsy on Inger Stevens, age 35. That was definitely a murder. And he called it acute barbiturate poisoning, just like Marilyn Monroe. Really? So you have a do-over. Marilyn Monroe goes away in 1962 of acute barbiturate poisoning, and then Inger Stevens, check her out. She goes by age 35 on April 30th, 1970. And 5 days later, Thomas Albert Decker goes by, and they rule that a suicide. And that's definitely a murder. When you're handcuffed, naked, in a bathtub, with a noose around your neck attached to the curtain rod, with a ball gag in your mouth, and inappropriate content written in red lipstick all over your chest and belly and abdomen, with bondage leather straps around your chest and stomach, and a scarf around your eyeballs, like the Victor Oda situation. That takes more than one person, right? So, but they ruled it a suicide. All right. Dennis Wilson, somebody did the autopsy on him. Can't get a name of the medical examiner for Dennis Wilson, But Thomas Noguchi did all the big famous people that you've heard of, from Janis Joplin to John Belushi to Robert Kennedy to Sharon Tate to Inger Stevens to William Holden to Thomas Albert Decker. And I don't agree with any of his findings on those except Robert Kennedy, which he concluded that the death shot came from within 10 millimeters of his skull behind his right ear. I agree with that. And I think the only person that was standing there was Thane Eugene Caesar, who admitted having a 22 caliber pistol, that morning at 12:15 a.m. on June 6th, 1968, at the Ambassador Hotel, a tear-down dump of a hotel that Robert Kennedy wanted to get out of as quickly as possible, probably because he sensed it was dangerous. All right, so Thomas Noguchi looks like he's a politically controlled person that's in the Los Angeles County Medical Examination Autopsy Department. And so he's a strategic soldier for all clandestine service murders that need to be swept under the carpet. That's my supposition. That's what it looks like. It kind of looks like Victor Oda had some sort of a mission also. I don't know what it is, though. I'm not pretending to know the motivation to murder Dr. Victor Oda, who was murdered on October 19th, 1970, during the Charlie Manson trial. That's a Monday. That's a Monday afternoon. Dr. Victor Oda was shot twice in the back of his head with a .38, thrown into his swimming pool at his Frank Lloyd Wright house. His wife, Virginia, shot once in the back of the head with a .38, her body tossed into the swimming pool. Her two children, her two 12 and 11-year-old sons, bandanas around their neck, their wrists tied in front of them, shot once. I heard a 22 caliber pistol. I heard a .38, shot in the back of the head, thrown into the swimming pool. The other boy, 11 years old, shot in the back of the head, thrown in the swimming pool. The secretary was there, Dorothea Caldwater. She shot once in the back of the head with a .38, thrown in the swimming pool. They had a kitty cat. Kitty cat is shot, thrown in the swimming pool. The house is a controlled arson blaze. They used the typewriter, type up a manifesto, neatly fold it, put it in the windshield wiper blade of the red Rolls Royce, reposition the red Rolls Royce at the bottom of the driveway, park it to block so the fire department can't come in, get the keys to the wife's car, the Lincoln Continental, drive that to the bottom of the driveway, park it so that it's obscuring the fire department. There was a station wagon on the property. That would have been moved first, park that outside the driveway, and then some team drove the station wagon north to where the University of California Santa Cruz campus was, and abandoned the car near a railroad tunnel close to the UC Santa Cruz campus. It was all done on October 19th, 1970, during the Charlie Manson trial, where they were interviewing Susan Atkins' cellmate, who was taking the stand, the only woman that Susan Atkins shared the toilet with, who is not generally well known in the media. They didn't promote her name. She's the one who would have spent the most hours with Susan Atkins, which wouldn't have been a lot, but it would have been a lot more than any of the other witnesses who committed perjury regarding what they alleged that Susan Atkins may or may not have said in order to get out of the jail for free, right? All right, so the third Japanese person that I want to bring up is Yoko Ono, because she was born in around the same time frame. She was born in 1933. Yoko Ono was born February 5th? February 18th, 1933, Yoko Ono is born. She is born to nobility class. She is born to nobility class. She also has to get through World War II, and they live close proximity to the palace. So guess what? The Allied bombers didn't bomb the palace. So Yoko Ono's story of, living in a bunker, it may or may not be true. They lived near the palace, and she attended the most prestigious boarding schools in Tokyo, And she went all the way through high school. Then Yoko Ono was admitted to the most prestigious university, which is associated with the pre-college, pre-university school. And she was the only female admitted into the philosophy department for that university. In 1951, Yoko Ono enrolls in university near the palace in Tokyo, but she drops out after 2 semesters because she mysteriously, magically joined some of her family members in New York City. Her father is an elite executive banker who's spent time in San Francisco, Tokyo, and is now undoubtedly in Manhattan. So Yoko Ono drops out of this prestigious, the #1 university in Tokyo, Japan, at a young age of, let's say, 21. She goes to New York, where she enrolls in Sarah Lawrence University in Yonkers, which is nice. It's a nice area along the Hudson River. And she goes there to school, where she meets a Japanese orchestra conductor who's same age as her. So they end up getting married real quick, like around age 24. And then they move on down to Manhattan and get involved with music industry and classical music and alternative classical music, if there was such thing, avant-garde music. And then the marriage has problems, and Yoko Ono suffers mental depression, clinical depression. She's sees a psychiatrist. Yoko Ono sees a psychiatrist, right?